So Glenn Greenwald goes on the Tucker Carlson show on X, formerly called Twitter, to talk about a lot of different things. And let's listen in to the conversation. We'll start as needed. Here we go.
On the part of Americans, because now there's another foreign war that's always part of the equation, the domestic aspect to it, that vests more power in the government and takes away more and more rights from Americans.
What's so terrifying to me, though, is that the right, the American political right, which really was through this kind of weird transformation that's happened over the past dozen years, has become the lone defenders of the First Amendment. They've abandoned that in the last month, like instantly. So I think you could say,
let me back it up just a bit here to get the full conversation.
Is that the right, the American political right, which really was through this kind of weird transformation that's happened over the past dozen years, has become the lone defenders of the First Amendment. They've abandoned that in the last month, like instantly. So I think you could say, you know, I strongly support Israel. I strongly dislike Hamas. I'm rooting for, maybe I think we should commit troops to the region. I mean, whatever. You can have any view you want. However, American citizens have a right to express their opinion, period. And that supersedes any other event in any other country. It's like that's a core right. And I don't hear many conservatives saying that. And so you sort of wonder, like, if they're not defending it, who will?
I mean, there are people who have built their careers, Tucker, over the last 5-6 years, standing up and saying, we can't have cancel culture. We can't have censorship. College students aren't entitled to feelings of safety. We don't censor in order to protect people from views they find threatening, mocking the notion that minority groups are vulnerable and we have to censor in order to protect them. Turn on a dime and now become the leading voices saying, because American Jews feel unsafe, that's valid in a way that, say, claims from Black people or LGBTs or Latinos aren't valid. And because of that, we need to censor. Fortunately, there have been some conservatives, influential ones, who have been quite consistent. Candace Owens, for example, had a very public argument with Megyn Kelly in which he was saying, we're not the left. We don't get people fired for their political views. We don't believe in using the law to silence people. There have been Vivek Ramaswamy on your show. He just wrote an article in the Wall Street Journal saying we're not going to defeat Hamas through censorship or cancel culture in the United States. And I think the biggest example and the most important one, which is fire.org, that became very popular among conservatives in the United States because they were defending the rights of free speech on campuses for conservative students at a time when the ACLU wouldn't, stood up and vehemently denounced Ron DeSantis for a grave direct attack on the First Amendment when he tried to ban a pro-Palestinian group on campus on the grounds that they're providing material support for Hamas, even though he doesn't claim they did anything other than express their views. And I think this is the point. You are allowed to stand up in the United States and say, I think the United States should bomb Iran into oblivion. I think we should turn Gaza into a parking lot. Lindsey Graham stands up every day and calls for violence of that kind, and he's protected by the First Amendment from doing so. You also, though, as an American, are allowed to stand up and say, I think Israel is at fault in this conflict because of the occupation and the blockade. I think that people in Palestine have a right to fight back. I think that violence is justified because Israel has become oppressive. You can think all those views are repulsive, but leave the question of what you think of those views to the side. No question, Americans have a right to express them. And there has been a concerted effort on the part of many conservatives, including many who have led the way in mocking claims of victimhood and victimhood narrative.
And what Glenn is saying here, all of you in our audience have witnessed, because I've covered how Fox News, and I've said many times on the Nick and CJ show, Fox News has been the one that's been in the forefront challenging this protest. Literally, Fox News was putting out 2-3 segments per day on YouTube. So if they're putting out 2-3 segments per day, that means they're doing 3 times that every day throughout their programming. So let's get back to the conversation. But to their point, I thought it was about free speech as a conservative. But Fox News is the one that's pushing censorship on college campuses the most, by far the most.
Narratives by minority groups and the idea that people need to feel safe. They are now the ones turning around and saying, no, because of how dangerous this speech is, we need to ban it. We need to ban these protests. We need to ban student groups. We need to put people on no hire lists. The exact kind of tactics they spent 5 or 6 years up until a month ago aggressively denouncing. And it's very dispiriting, even though it's not surprising, the minute that they have views that they find offensive for them to watch them and turn around and use all the same theories to say those views cannot be expressed. That is incredibly dangerous, because in the future, when conservatives want to complain about the censorship regime that has been implemented, who will possibly take them seriously after we just watched them, the minute there was an issue of great importance to them, which is Israel, turn around and call for censorship? Obviously, it's not a principle if the only time you defend free speech is when it comes to views you agree with. Anybody can do that. That's easy to do. That's worthless. The only real test of whether you believe in free speech is whether you defend the right to express the views you find most offensive. And a lot of conservatives, not all, are woefully failing that test.
I have to say, I am surprised. I was shocked by it. I am shocked by it. And I'm shocked not just by how little they care about freedom of expression, but also about the emotion involved. So for the past, I don't know, 20 years, it's been a staple of demonstrations on college campuses to attack the United States. It's a garbage country. It was built on chattel slavery. It's fundamentally illegitimate. The New York Times devoted an entire year to telling us that the United States is a fundamentally racist country. And it's an immoral place, fundamentally, from its inception. And nobody said anything about it. Nobody stopped sending money to UPenn over that when they were attacking the US or white people, or none of that even registered with anybody. But the second a foreign country gets criticized, we got to shut it down. I mean, where's the concern for the United States? Or is that a stupid question?
Yeah, I mean, I had Mike Johnson on my show, the new Speaker of the House, 2 months ago, and I walked away with a somewhat positive impression. And yet I was amazed that, we have this ritual in the United States. It's not very common. We elect a new speaker. It's only happened 56 times in the whole history of our country. And the new speaker sends up this tribune and he gives a speech to try and tell Americans what his speakership will be about. And Mike Johnson had one opportunity to do that. And he said, the very first thing we're going to do. And Americans were like, what are you going to do for us? Are you going to end the fentanyl crisis? Are you going to keep drugs out of our country? Are you going to provide better jobs for us? Are you going to reindustrialize? He said, the very first thing we are going to do is pass a bill to help our friend Israel. That's the first thing we're going to do. And obviously, there are a lot of people in the United States who have great affinity for other countries. Rashida Tlaib has a Palestinian flag outside her office. A lot of people have the Ukrainian flag flying inside their house. And huge numbers of people have intense affinity for Israel, which is fine. You're allowed to have that. The problem becomes when you immediately abandon all of the principles that you claim to believe in defense of this foreign country. And the only reason, Tucker, I say that I wasn't surprised is because I have noted many times before that the American right does seem willing to give up free speech as soon as the issue is Israel. I think one of the most disturbing set of laws that we have that were enacted mostly by red state governors and red state legislatures, and they've been invalidated by federal courts, thankfully, on the grounds that they violate free speech, but Andrew Cuomo did it too, are laws that say that if you want to work with the state, if you want to have a contract with our state, you have to sign a pledge vowing that you do not support a boycott of Israel.
So this is those laws that are against BDS. And as Glenn stated, they're primarily, or the majority of them, are in red states. So the so-called free speech warriors, and somebody in the audience, I think I put the comment up, is like, conservatives have never been about free speech. That's a mirage that they just like. They like to use free speech so we can be racist. But they're obviously not against or not for free speech, and it's proven. And what Glenn is saying here about the anti-BDS laws, where and how they're primarily, or the majority of them, are in red states. Let's continue.
Otherwise, you are not hireable. You're allowed to support a boycott of any other country. You can boycott Peru, you can boycott South Korea or Russia or China, whatever other country you want to boycott, that's totally fine. Boycott that. You're even allowed to boycott other states in your own country. You're allowed to harm the economies and the businesses of your fellow citizens.
Own country.
And in fact, Andrew Cuomo, when he announced that he, by executive order, that if you support a boycott of Israel, you can't get hired by the state of New York, Andrew Cuomo, the very same one, issued by executive order boycotts of Indiana and North Carolina on the grounds that they had enacted bathroom bills for trans people that he found offensive. So there were a lot of red states and red state governors enacting these laws that say, if you want to work with the state, you're free to boycott any other country or any other state in the United States. You just can't boycott Israel. And there's been a lot of those kinds of that tolerance for that sort of thing, because obviously the United States is a very pro-Israel country, and it's a winning political issue among a lot of American Jews, but also a ton of American evangelicals or just national security hawks. And there has been tolerance for erosion of free speech in the name of Israel before, but nowhere to the extent that we're now seeing. And I agree that the severity of it is surprising.
I would like to think there's an even bigger constituency for pro-America, but there doesn't seem to be, at least it's not represented in the Congress. So I have to ask.
So now, I can kind of give my last words on this part because they're about to move to Joe Biden. And it's good that a person like Tucker Carlson is saying what he's saying, calling out right-wing people who all of a sudden aren't free speech warriors. Because he said in the last couple of months, now they're all of a sudden not free speech warriors. Coming with the Uhuru African socialist group, and now with the pro-Palestinian protests. Now, it would be better if he was getting this message out on Fox News. It would reach a lot more people, or maybe not. We'll see how many this episode gets as far as views, but it just came out. 59 million views already. So wow. So it's getting, I guess not. So he's reaching maybe the same amount of people, but maybe a different crop of people. So this is what Glenn said about the interview. I spoke here to Tucker Carlson about the war in Ukraine, the predictable abandonment by the West of it, Biden's serious troubles, and the Gaza war, specifically the spat of the right-wing censorship and cancellation of the pro-Palestinian voices. This is the heart of it to me. So now let's go to Joe Biden.
I would like to think there's an even bigger constituency for pro-America, but there doesn't seem to be, at least it's not represented in the Congress. So I have to ask about President Biden. These polls come out over the weekend showing that he's losing in a theoretical matchup among registered voters in 5 out of 6 swing states, the biggest swing states. It looks like if the election were held today, if not much changes, he would lose. And immediately you have David Axelrod, Bill Kristol, pretty devoted Biden voters saying we need a new guy. What do you make of that polling? Do you think it reflects reality? And what do you think will happen to Biden?
I think the most amazing part about this, Tucker, is that if any leading American politician had even gotten near the possibility of an indictment 10 years ago, the prospect of them running for high office would be instantly over. And here you have Donald Trump, who has been indicted on felony charges in 4 different American jurisdictions, 2 state jurisdictions, 2 federal jurisdictions. And not only has it not harmed him, it actually has helped him in the polls for sure among Republican voters. His lead has expanded every time he's indicted, but also among American independents and even groups that traditionally support Democrats almost reflexively, like Black voters who 22% of in this latest poll, and we've seen similar polls say they would vote for Trump over Biden, and 42% of Latinos. And what this shows is that Americans have really come to the conclusion that our leading institutions of authority are radically corrupted. Our media outlets are radically corrupted. The Department of Justice and the
to Glenn's point here, this is a great point, because how we talk about it, Nick and I talk about, report cards. The media is reading over their report cards when they're looking at these poll numbers. But what Glenn is saying here is spot on, that what the Trump candidacy also represents on a larger scale than anything else is that people aren't listening to what the media is telling them. People aren't listening to the CNNs, the Washington Posts, the New York Times, because they're the ones that's pushing all of these indictments. They're the ones that's pushing the 91 counts against Donald Trump. They're the one that's pushing all the negative stories about him everywhere. and he's still winning. He's still winning in 5 of the 6 swing states. He's still winning nationally. So to his point, it is an indication of that, which is great.
The legal system has been aggressively politicized. And so now Donald Trump is in a position where he's facing serious felony charges. I don't think they're serious in the sense that they're real, but they're serious in the sense that if he's convicted, he'll go to jail. They're felony charges. And yet his lead is expanding over Joe Biden, in part because people, I think, see the injustice of it. But also everybody can just look at Joe Biden and see that he is not a person capable of even managing his own life, much less the country.
Yes.
And that there's no cure for that. That's not going to get better. That's only going to get worse. And what their strategy now is to basically say to Americans, and I've seen many articles about this, many things on television, the problem is that American voters are ignorant. They're ill-informed. They're low information voters, and that's why they're deciding this way, because the Democratic Party, I think, is stuck with Joe Biden. If he's not going to go anywhere, and he's the kind of politician who has never sacrificed his own personal self-interest for any kind of greater cause, there's no reason to expect that he would do so now. They're tied at the hip to him, and they see these polls and are in extreme panic mode. I think if you have liberal friends, you should definitely check on how they're doing after that last poll, because it's not just a Biden collapse. It's in key swing states, all of which he won in 2020, where Trump now has a significant lead despite 4 indictments. So all their efforts to try and destroy Trump have failed, at least until now. And I don't think the Democratic Party is going to abandon Joe Biden. If he wants to run, he's going to be their nominee.
So there seems, and maybe we're imagining this, we pulled together a montage of media coverage of Biden recently. I want you to listen to it. It does seem a little different from what I remember last time I watched TV. Here it is.
A stunning New York Times Siena poll shows that Donald Trump leading Joe Biden in Nevada, Georgia, Arizona, and Michigan.
The number of Americans who think that things are going badly in the country today has hit its high for the year. So you might expect any incumbent to be down as Biden is. But then look at these positive views of what people think will happen for them financially if Donald Trump wins. Way more voters think they'd be better off.
I guess the big news in the poll is that Biden is losing to Donald Trump because of huge losses among Black voters and young voters.
The more diverse the swing state, the farther Mr. Biden was behind, and he led only in the whitest of 6.
Then let's look overseas. There's more voters, we find, who think that it's Trump that would keep the U.S. out of a war if he wins.
This is probably going to lead to a lot of Democrats increasing the chatter and make room for another Democrat.
I love that white liberals are the only people who like Biden. So perfect. But the media don't appear, maybe I'm reading too much of this, they don't appear to be downplaying this, much less ignoring it.
They're not.
They seem to be highlighting Biden's weakness. What do you make of that?
And I'll answer that question. What I make of it is that this is them trying to convince Joe Biden to drop out of the race. So, because you're like, oh, why are they all of a sudden now talking about the bad polling that Joe Biden is getting? Because he's been getting bad polling for a long time, and we've been complaining how they never talk about it. So what was the pivot now is that there's coming down to the wire. Deadlines to file to get on ballots is coming down to the wire, and now you're seeing a push. It started with David Ignatius in the Washington Post talking about Joe Biden shouldn't run. That was the title of that article. We covered it. And now to get this latest New York Times Siena poll that shows him losing in 4 out of 6 states outside of the margin of error, and then a 5th state Trump is winning or leading them, but within the margin of error, he's losing the Black vote. 22% of the Black vote is going to Donald Trump, which is historic. But let's read briefly this part here. Why Biden shouldn't be taking Black support for granted. A recent found 22% of Black voters in 6 battleground states said they would support former president in next year's election, while 71% say they would back Biden. The total for Trump is a percentage no Republican presidential candidate has reached with black voters in a half of century. That was the subheadline. I'll read the story now. A new poll showing President Biden struggling with black voters has Democratic strategists urging the campaign to increase its outreach to a critical demographic, while black conservatives see an opportunity for the GOP to siphon support for their own candidate. The numbers in the poll released Sunday by the New York Times and Siena College were staggering for Democrats. The poll found that 22% of black voters in 6 battleground states said they would support the former president in the next election. Trump won just 8% of the black vote in 2020. That's 14 percentage points. And 6% in 2016. According to the Pew Research, no Democratic presidential candidate has won less than 80% of the black vote since the civil rights era until now, and that is Joe Biden. So just wanted to present one receipt to what Tucker and Glenn mentioned in that exchange about the black vote, which is very historical, that the percentage that Joe Biden's getting. And like I said, he's getting the majority of black male votes. This is talking about the total vote. But when you're saying just black men, he's getting the majority. Now, it's a slight majority. I think it's 51 or 52%. But he's getting the majority of that now, which is still kind of amazing for any Republican. And I still think it's the relentless attacking of him. It's the 91 charges. It makes him relatable to some people in the black community, in my opinion.